the BBC Two idents, which was done with Super Union. Is that right?
Yeah, so BBC Creative and Super Union. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they're massively kind of lauded for their kind of creativity and the impact that they had. But I think I just wanted to start off by asking a bit about the background on essentially how, I guess, a composer got involved with a brand agency.
Yeah. Yeah, in a sort of really funny roundabout way, I guess. It's sort of, I had been working a little bit with newly created BBC Creative. They sort of just started their own in-house agency again, relatively recently. While I started working with them, and I ended up arranging and composing the music for the World Cup. When was that? 2000. I don't remember what year that was.
2016? No, 2018, maybe.
Yeah, I can't remember. But anyway, so basically, I arranged the music to the this World Cup theme tune. We arranged this Russian song, and that sort of got me to know the guys at BBC Creative, and they asked me to do other little bits because it went really well, and they're really lovely producers and people and creatives, and it's a really nice environment to be a freelancer in and work with them. And then this email sort of came out of the blue from Super Union rather than BBC Creative, saying we've got a few people, we're just sort of putting some feelers out into a project. Would you mind just coming in and taking a look and seeing what you think? So I did, signed lots of NDAs and went to Super Union. I saw this really early. They showed me Kath and Stu, who are the creative directors of Super Union, Katrina Tupple and Stuart Bradford. They showed me some really early ideas they've been working on of sort of animations of movements of this two, and they sort of said, what would the music be like? So I have no idea. I could almost, I guess because I hadn't seen any of it beforehand. And I sort of said, it's almost like it needs some sort of musical environment. I love the way it moves and just all these beautiful environments. It's almost like you could go to be in. So I thought, why don't we create the music out of the sound? And I thought, okay, that's kind of an interesting idea. And then I ended up going back and writing like a 3 or 4 page document for a bit longer, just talking about what I might do and how I might go around it, and talking about other idents, and just really thinking about what we could do with these. I really fell in love with the concept and the ideas, and then sent them off and then didn't hear anything for months. I thought, oh, well, that's the end of that then. Sort of was waiting for them to sort of pop up on telly and see what they sounded like. And then I get another email out of the blue going, right, can you pitch for this this ident? You've got a week. You've got this. I said, well, no, I can't actually because I'm doing a show. I'm really not a good time, and I'm really sorry. Can I have a bit longer? And they just said no. So I was in the West End with a laptop at the back of the stalls in a tech rehearsals of a show, and a previews of a show, just sort of trying to, in between kind of working and doing quite intense work on the show, trying to start an idea of a pitch. And they sent me some ideas, some early drafts of idents, and over that, I think they gave me 7 days. So over the course of those sort of 7 nights, come back from the theatre, just working all night, just trying some ideas. I came up with a pitch, and I just went and presented it to Kath and Stuart and Susan, who's the creative, one of the creative directors of BBC Creative. And they seemed to really love it, and they said, great. Can you do that? But it's interesting actually, because I think from what I heard from them afterwards, and I ended up meeting a couple of other people that pitched for it really randomly, but it was quite interesting how I guess my pitch was all about, ironically enough, because I was in the theatre when I was in the middle of pitching it, but my pitch to them was, why don't we not treat it like a TV sound design. You know, in TV you have a sound designer, you have a composer. You know, it's kind of, and the way they'd done their brief, and I can show you their brief. It's like, it was very much sort of like, we need some sounds for this, and we need a music bed that will be the same in all the idents. And so I guess they didn't really know how they could connect the music and sound, and for it to be the same and connect throughout the idents. I guess that was the big thing to figure out, I guess, in the pitch, and you know, when working on it. And my sort of pitch to them was, why don't we almost treat it like a theatre show? So when I work in theatre, I don't just write the music, I design the sound, and I very much treat them as one thing. So, you know, say that you're going into a scene and it's in a windy wood, and you can sort of, you know, the music sort of morph from some sort of instrument into some sort of wind, or some sort of, and it'll carry on under the scene. And that's how I sort of work all the time in theatre, very much just try and make music out of the sound, make the sound into the music, and just really just try and mold them together. And that's sort of what I said we should do with this. I think, you know, we should take sound effects and turn them into instruments. We could take instruments and just play them in weird ways into sort of sound effects, and create these sort of soundscapes that feel like they're so part of the what's happening on screen, that it feels like it's just being, the sounds are being made by what's happening on screen. Like even the music is being made. It's just so natural that. And it's interesting, I think the other people that pitched for it were sort of teams. So you have a sound designer and a composer. So a sound designer made some lovely sounds, or, you know, and then the composer made some lovely sort of beats or music or this and that. And it was kind of, I think, as far as I'm aware, I was the only person that sort of went, actually, let's not have these sort of separate worlds. Let's just make our own world of sound and music, and let's make that the brand. And actually, it almost came easier than I thought. Easier isn't the right word, because it's obviously not easy. But I've been trying. The BBC were quite worried about, especially reading their brief, of how they could make the sound very different but the same in all these different idents. They categorised them in moods, which they wanted to connect with programming. So, you know, you have dark, gritty moods before Peaky Blinders, and you have sort of much more neutral moods before the news, and like escapist, you know, sort of moods before travel programs. You're kind of in the desert, and loads of really, really interesting briefs. So sort of actually, there was a lot of stuff to do even before they finished the videos, because you could sort of see where each one was going and where, you know. But so I sort of had this idea of creating a bit of a mnemonic at the beginning, which was sort of, depending on the mood, it would sort of end in a chord. So you sort of have like a happy chord for interesting sort of wildlife thing, or a kind of a dark chord for, and it's sort of simplified over time. I think my original pitch actually had like 2 big notes and a thing, so it was much more musical. But actually, I ended up getting rid of that about a couple of weeks after starting. And when we, you know, were fully starting the job, and it just ended up being a really simple, almost a chord that would then go into a soundscape. And the soundscapes were all very, very, very different. But I guess because we were using the same techniques of sort of using sounds and music and sort of trying to create our own little worlds, and mixing them with sort of like a very similar sort of opening when you kind of came in, and they all sort of worked. So actually, when you looked at them all together, it sort of all really worked and made sense. Because they were sort of, I knew that they wanted to be, they had an idea where they wanted to reverse some of the idents and put them in, so they almost crashed into one another. So in like the junctions between programs, it wasn't just about the ident at the beginning of the program. It was about creating a whole brand identity for the whole junction, which I think was quite a interesting and bold move, which I don't think people had done before. So it's about even having identities and the brands of a type of programming for the programs that they were advertising in the junctions, which was really interesting. And I think, and one of their other big things they wanted to work out was how can we sort of crash idents into one another? How can we have like a dark, gritty ident which sort of goes, and then you sort of have a 2, and then that changes into a 2 very happy, wonderful ident. And how do you do that? And so I sort of came up with almost like a reverse of the beginning of that. So we sort of start with like a sort of a ting or a bell and a chord, and I sort of reversed the ting, the bell and the chord and into it, so it sort of came in. And that sort of, once you've sort of got that idea, which is quite early on, everything, the sort of the sound, the brand sort of came together quite quickly, because it was sort of,
So I
that
guess,
was the similar thing that was happening in all of them.
so
But
you kind of use the ident as the transition between program types, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the idea is you're sort of going from one program and one sort of identity, one sort of ident, and then almost going, and then they call it like a jump cut or a match cut into the next sort of type of programming, straight into the where you're going. I think that was quite a really interesting concept. So in my briefs for each different ident, it wasn't just about what was happening in it. It was like, what the kind of programs that will be used with this ident, what will be kind of programs that are used in this one, and sort of.
I think you're right. I mean, you've said a few really, really interesting things there, which is so I think a lot of agencies who work with brand, I think they really understand the visual, but I think that the kind of oral is something that has not really been explored a great deal for brand. So some brands have done it a bit more than others.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting about what you're saying about these is that, and actually, even though you are a composer, that you're saying it's more about, I guess, branded sound rather than music. Like as you'd think of music, because I think you'd get the impression that I think a lot of maybe a lot of the other people who went for it were pitching ideas that were more like kind of music, and they're just kind of overlaid on top of the visual, rather than what you're saying is that make it all feel like it's the same thing. Like, I thought what was really interesting was where you said it's as if that the visual has created that sound thing. I think
that's
great.
yeah, I agree. Like that's what makes it really interesting to do, I think, because it's quite hard to try to think of having something visual and trying to come up with an identity to it. So if actually thinking of it as part of, well, the identity is making the sound in itself. Like how can that happen? And that's kind of really as soon as you've kind of got that concept, it's a lot easier to think of how that sound can